Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. There will be no listener mailbag this week because I kind of want to jump right in. This should be an interesting show, interesting topic. And the premise of this show, or the question that we're going to look at, is, can an adult beginner reach 1600? That is an over-the-board classical rating of 1600. And we're going to be looking at this. I'm going to be sharing a lot of my observations as a player and a tournament director, my own experience, and some context and general remarks up front. So first, this may get a bit ranty, and a lot of what I say might be hot takes. That's not my intent, but it may go in that direction. So I'm just letting you know this is just my own opinion based on my years of experience on the amateur tournament scene. So you can take it, you can throw it away. I'm simply sharing my thoughts. And this episode is going to look at improvement from a ratings point of view. I just want to be clear. We're looking at it from sort of a statistical or mathematical approach. This really isn't about the love of the game and our enjoyment of it, which of course is important. But I just want to be clear that that's the specific lens that I'm using to sort of look at this question. Now, I'm a New York guy. This is kind of a New York podcast in a way because I've lived here my whole life. And I want to mention Bill Parcells, the famed coach of the New York Jets, one of the best. And Bill Parcells had a great quote about your record and your performance. And this is for the National Football League here in the States. And Bill Parcells said, "You are what your record says you are." And his whole thing was some teams were saying, yeah, well, our record's not what it should be because of injuries, or we're in a very tough division this year. And he would say, no, you are what your record says you are. And as far as chess, you may think you are a better player and more knowledgeable than your rating. But remember, your rating is not necessarily an indicator of your playing strength, but an indicator of your tournament performance. Okay, so a lot of people equate rating with just strength. Well, if you're rated, let's say 900, then you're a quote unquote weaker or beginner player. And if you're rated 1900, you're a quote unquote stronger player. While that's true to a certain degree, it's more nuanced. Again, your rating is a comparison to other players as far as your results. But again, it's an indicator of your tournament performance. And it's generally accurate, like it or not. I mean, we can get into nuance about rating deflation and things like that, and I understand that, and I've spoken about it. But to take a page from Bill Parcells, you are what your rating says you are as far as tournament results. And Parcells' whole thing was that the results speak for themselves. Now, one thing that sometimes gets annoying, you'll hear players say like, yeah, I'm 1280, that's my listed rating, but I'm really 1400. Or I'm 1300, but my coach says I'm really 1500. Not really. Your performance is what your rating says it is. If your rating is 1300, that is an accurate representation of your tournament performance. Now, yeah, you could argue maybe you are stronger than that. But remember, the 1300 represents your tournament results. And then I'll also hear things like, well, I'm 1400 US chess over the board, but I'm 2000 online rapid. So anyway, more on the whole 2000 rapid online rating in a moment. The other thing, what many chess players do when they're in a slump, and I'm sure I've gone through this myself, is we turn to platitudes such as, well, I don't care about rating. Rating is not important. You are not your rating. I mean, let's take that last one, like you are not your rating or something similar to that. Now, of course, in many contexts, that's true. Your rating doesn't have anything to do with your love of the game and your enjoyment of it and the process. Absolutely. So in many, many contexts, the idea that you are not your rating is true. But again, when it comes to your tournament performance and your tournament results, yes, you are your rating. It's an accurate number. All right. So remember, I'll say it again for like the second or third time. Your rating is not necessarily your strength. It's a representation of your tournament performance. So in that context, you are what your rating says you are. Now, this may sound a little harsh or maybe overly critical. Not at all. The reason I'm saying this, I was that player. I was that struggling player. I didn't start getting serious about chess and playing in tournaments until I was an adult. I was that adult who was like 1100 and was struggling, but I turned it around. I achieved a peak over the board classical rating of 1885. I mean, call it 1900, almost there. It's come down a bit. I've had some swings, very typical at the amateur level. I'm working my way back. My own chess path, just as a side note, that's going to be a separate episode that I'm working on where I'm going to go through my whole process and my whole chess path in detail. But the point is, what I'm talking about today, I lived this myself. I was that player in the 800 to 1300 range. I was not the player who started playing in tournaments and after like 4 months was 1900. Definitely not. And for this episode, we're talking about your classical over-the-board rating, whether it's US Chess or FIDE. Now, FIDE is in a little bit of a different situation because of the deflation rating increase that they added, where some players got up to 400 points. They also made the minimum rating 1400. I wish US Chess would do something similar, maybe not quite as many points, but they should do something. I mean, US Chess has said that they've done things to combat rating deflation. I don't quite agree. I don't think they've done enough, but that's another discussion for another day. So anyway, in this episode, again, we're focusing on your over-the-board rating. We're not going to get into your online rapid rating, which, let's talk about this for a moment. That seems to be all the rage. Now, somehow all these people who started playing during the pandemic, they have an online rapid rating of 2000, right? Like everybody has now a 2000 rapid rating. If you look at posts online, if you look at videos, I mean, I don't know how much of it to believe. I'm sure some of it is true, but it just, I don't know, is it me? It just seems like everybody, oh yeah, I'm 2000 rapid online. I don't know. That just seems to be my perception and my read of the situation. So I don't know what that's all about. Anyhow, speaking of the current chess boom since the pandemic and the Queen's Gambit, what's happening, and I don't really like this narrative, is that online ratings seem to be treated as equal to over-the-board ratings. So the online ratings, like chess.com, Lee Chess, whatever it is, they're being treated as if they're just as valid as over-the-board ratings. And that's a little disturbing to me. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing the online play. I'm on chess.com all the time, not always to play, but for their study materials to analyze. I'm on there all the time. I believe in the online platforms and what they allow players to do, their instructional material. Many players don't have access to a chess club, or because of their schedule, they can't play over the board. I get that. So there is a place for online play. I like all the instructional resources, the courses, the websites. But again, online chess, it's not real chess. It's not, it never will be. It's still a great tool. Again, I use it myself, but we cannot equate it, the online chess play and the online chess ratings, with over the board. But many people seem to be doing that. That's sort of the new narrative that's out there. The other thing I'll say is you have a new crop of players like talking about improvement. Some are even creating content, but they've never played in an over-the-board tournament, or maybe they played in one. I find that a little odd. Maybe that's me. Maybe I sound like a fuddy-duddy, but you know, if you're talking about chess improvement and you feel you have something to offer to others, but you've never played in an over-the-board tournament, I don't know, I question that a little bit, but I'm seeing a lot of that. So anyhow, this episode, the rest of what I'm talking about, it's really going to be geared toward adult players rated about 800 to 1300, which is probably the top of the bell curve. Most amateur adults are in this range. So just for some context, if you have an over-the-board classical rating of, say, 1400 or above, that's actually an above average rating at the amateur level. You'd be surprised because even at our club, We have a whole bunch of new people now. It's fantastic. Most of them are rated below 1400. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, a few more points about chess improvement in general, and then we'll get to the whole idea of whether a beginner can get to 1600. All right, now first thing, if there were a formula or a secret sauce to improve, everyone would be good. But that's not the case. The bell curve distribution is alive and well because we have people of equal intelligence and experience. They're doing the same study plan or the same amount of playing and analyzing. And some people will excel, some people will stagnate, and some people will actually get worse. So if there were just a formula or a list that people could follow, then everyone would be good. So think about that. Everyone improves at different rates. This is a speech you've heard me give before. There are people who have a coach or more than one coach, and they have a ton of study material, and they work really hard at it. They're basically intelligent people, and they see minimal to no improvement. While others have virtually no study plan, minimal playing experience, and they excel very quickly. Now understand, those are the exceptions, but the point is that it's different for everyone. The other thing, because you're going to hear things about improvement, and then it's going to mess with your head like, why isn't that me? And what I mean by that is everyone has a I know a guy story, right? I know a guy who just played 3-0 blitz online and did nothing else and, got to 1900. I know a guy who never read a chess book and is 2000. I know a guy who, after playing just in 2 tournaments, was 1700. And here's my I know a guy story. So when I was playing in tournaments and I was in that like 12, 1300 range, I was struggling to improve. I was really frustrated about it. I was speaking to someone at a tournament. We were talking, really nice guy. And he said something that really messed with my head. I don't think he meant it this way, where I was just discussing my story and he goes, oh yeah, no, I was like 1800 a year after playing. And I said, okay, but it really messed with my head for a few weeks after, because if you're studying and you're playing and you're struggling and you're not seeing improvement, and then someone tells you that, it's like, wow, like, what's wrong with me? So we all know these I know a guy stories. And again, those are generally exceptions. So you just have to take those for what it is and understand that they're going to be out there, which brings me to a lot of the so-called adult improver stories out there. You'll hear these adult improver stories where they made big leaps and bounds in their rating. Those are the exceptions. But what happens is when we hear it, we think it should happen to us. As an analogy, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but I'll use it. It's kind of like if you read a news story about a plane crash. You might think, oh, I don't want to fly because it's dangerous. But the truth is, you are at a higher risk getting in your car and driving to work every day. Because statistically, flying in a plane is still absolutely the safest way to travel. I was reading something the other day. It's something like a 1 in 1 point something million chance of dying in a plane crash. But what happens is when these plane crashes happen, it's so publicized on the news that it makes it seem like it's mainstream and it's everywhere, but it's really not. It's still an exception when you look at the thousands or millions of people who fly every day. So it's still very, very safe. And it's sort of with these adult improver stories, you see someone, whatever it might be, on a YouTube video or a podcast where, oh, they made great leaps and bounds. And you think, well, everybody's doing it. Those stories are the exceptions. Now, I will tell you, the overwhelming majority of players are not going to have a huge upward trajectory in their rating. That's the reality. And also for many of these adult improver stories, what they did very often doesn't apply to most people, or it's just completely unrealistic. Many of them talk about how they studied with a GM coach or just had private coaching in general, which is very expensive. A lot of people don't have the means for that. Or they'll talk about like taking a leave of absence from their job to pursue chess, which seems crazy to me. So, you hear these things that some of them, now, just not every story, but some of them have done where it's like, it just bears no resemblance. It just has no bearing to reality. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do a separate episode at some point discussing my own personal chess progression. I mean, the full story from when I started playing. We're now going to take a short break, and we will continue this conversation in just a moment. Let's get into some general improvement tips and some thoughts there. What I'm giving you now, this is not a study plan. I'm not giving you a study plan. I'm just giving you some loosely connected thoughts. And yes, to answer the question we started with, an adult beginner or an advanced beginner can absolutely achieve an over-the-board rating of 1600, probably even higher, if they approach it correctly and put the time in. Some will say, well, in years past, it was a lot easier to do. I think that's true to a sense, but it's kind of a give and take. In the past, it was a bit easier to get to 1600 as a beginner because the amateur chess scene wasn't as competitive as it is now. The players are a lot stronger, but I think it's easier now because of the resources and materials you have. So if you do it in a focused way, if you use the correct materials and put the time in, and you don't just mindlessly play bullet online, I think it can be done. So the amazing resources we have now, that will help compensate for the fact that the amateur chess scene is much more competitive and there are stronger players now. But it absolutely can be done. So let's go over some of these improvement ideas. All right, so the first chess improvement idea, this is not surprising. It's something I've mentioned over and over. You need to play and analyze your games. You have to analyze your games. You just cannot play. You have to do both. The game analysis is where you're really going to see where your mistakes are and what you need to work on. You'll see patterns that keep recurring over and over again. Very important. Second thing, you need lots and lots of over-the-board experience. You have to play in person. And when you first get involved in tournaments, most people, this is the norm. You will lose a lot of games along the way. That's normal. You're also going to have some very, very painful and embarrassing losses. That's part of the process. Now, when I say over-the-board experience, that's preferably at the club level where you can get a weekly game, but you need to play regularly for a number of reasons. We spoke about this in the past episode or whatever that was a few weeks ago about tournament conditions. Club level chess, where it's your local club, a once a week game, that is much more preferable to these crazy weekend events, but you need to play regularly. The next thing, and I feel this disturbingly is not talked about enough, you need a foundation. If you're going to become a good tournament player at the amateur level, you need a foundation. And what I mean by that is in the current chess boom, many players, their studying is all over the place. And this is where many adult players are lacking. In other words, their chess development has no base. There's no foundation. It's piecemeal. There may be playing, they're studying this puzzle. There's no rhyme or reason to what they're learning. And that's why they have trouble improving. That's why books like The Amateur's Mind or something like Simple Chess by Michael Steen will give you that grounding that you need as far as reading a position, coordination of the pieces, planning. Like, what are the responsibilities of each piece? Like, what is a bishop supposed to do? What is a knight supposed to do? How do you develop? How do you understand how everything coordinates? Which, again, you know this about me. That's why I recommend The Amateur's Mind by Jeremy Silman, because that book, that will make you understand the game as a whole and give you that foundation. But most players now in this new chess boom, they're not doing that. They're just kind of like playing, studying this, but there's no, okay, it's kind of like building a house without a strong foundation on the bottom. It's just going to fall apart. You need that grounding, and many players don't have that. It's just like, it's, you know, they do tactics or they'll do some puzzles or they'll just do puzzle rush, but they don't really understand the game itself and how everything fits together. So that foundation is huge. That's something that's not spoken about enough. So in addition to lots of playing and over-the-board experience, having that foundation, you do need to study as well. Playing is important, but you can't just play. And again, everything, openings, middle game, end game tactics. You have to study all phases of the game. But I don't want to be one of these people who says, well, just study the openings, middle game, and end game. No, but what specifically? For openings, and I'm giving you sort of the Cliff Notes version here. Openings, again, you want to have a set opening repertoire that you stick to. Stick with the same openings. You know, that's my philosophy. I'm going to steal that slogan from Ron Popeil, the famous infomercial guy. You want to set it and forget it. Have your set opening repertoire and then set it and forget it. Middle game, you want to understand all your plans, your strategy, pawn structure, things like that. All the basic end game ideas, king and pawn versus king, the opposition, all that stuff, rook and minor pieces, rook and pawn. Tactics obviously is important as well. But what most players do is they just play blitz and bullet online, and they don't analyze their games, they don't study, they don't play over the board, and then they complain that they're not improving. So all they do is play blitz and bullet. They don't study, they don't analyze, and then, I'm having trouble improving. And they can't seem to process. It's because mindlessly playing blitz and bullet, you're not going to improve from doing that. At least most people won't. The next thing, and this is probably going to be considered a hot take, the idea that, well, you just need to do tactics. Just do tactics. Don't worry about openings. You just need to crunch tactics. You got to spend more time on tactics. I do not agree with that. I think that's overblown. Now, yes, of course you have to study tactics as part of your study plan, but the idea that, 90% of your study should just be tactics and nothing else, I don't agree with that. Because as you play in over the board games and as you face stronger competition, here's the problem with that whole just do tactics thing. What about the 80% of positions where no tactics exist? What about those closed positions that require slow maneuvering and correctly timed pawn levers? What about those king and pawn endgames where it's about technique and not tactical shots? And here's the thing, cheap tactics are only going to get you so far. Now, yes, against certain players, against weaker players, yeah, you could just go for cheapies each game and you can probably get away with it. But I'm telling you, as you face stronger competition, that's not going to fly. Let me give an example of a situation where tactics aren't going to help you. I had a game this week at the club. My opponent was about 14-10, something like that, lower rated player than me. And without getting into specifics, we basically end up with an end game where I'm up a pawn and my pawn structure is better. He has a very weak, isolated outside pawn, and it was all technique that won. It had nothing to do with tactics. I used my rooks to double up against the pawn, forced a trade, and then had an easily winning king and pawn ending. And of course, that's an excellent strategy. If you can transpose into a winning endgame, I mean, that's what Fischer did a lot of. I'm not comparing myself to Fischer, but the point is that had nothing to do with tactics. That had to do with endgame knowledge and technique. So there are going to be lots of times where the whole tactical thing is not going to help you. Now, yes, of course, tactics are going to help you. I just don't agree with just do tactics. I think that's overblown. Maybe a hot take, but I stand by that. And the last chess improvement idea that I want to mention is that for many players, it's not so much chess knowledge or a lack of chess knowledge that hinders their improvement. It's bad habits. It's bad habits at the board and erroneous thinking patterns that do it. So they could study all they want and play all they want, but if they don't eradicate these bad habits, they're never going to get better. As one example, we have a player at the club who always rushes his moves, and there's no need to. He plays every game like it's a 5-minute blitz game. And he'll get away with it for a little bit, but then what happens is he makes one fast move too many, and then he ends up losing. And I've spoken to him about this. I'm like, you got to slow down a little bit. And this brings up an interesting point about rating. So the player I'm speaking about, he's rated about 1450, maybe 1430, around there. What he'll do, and I've seen other players do this as well, but let's just take a 1450 player as example. He'll play really, really well for most of the game. He might even play at 2000 strength. But the thing is, if you play at 2000 strength for most of the game, but in the late middle game, you blunder because you rush, and as a result, your rating is 1450, well, guess what? You're a 1415 player. Okay, it doesn't matter that you're playing like a 2000 player for most of the game. If you're making that one blunder at the end and you're losing games and now your rating is 1450, well, guess what? You're a 1450 player. But this is where people get into what I said earlier. Yeah, I'm really 2000 because for most of the game I play at that level. I just make this one blunder. Well, guess what? You're a 1450 player. You are what your rating says you are. That's what your tournament performance is. The fact that you played at a 2000 level for most of the game before the blunder, it doesn't matter. The result is what counts towards your rating. So something to think about, but it's the bad habits that hinder people more than their chess knowledge. So for this last segment, I want to respond to a Reddit post about this, and this is what kind of inspired this episode. And I'll link this up, of course, for you to check it out. And the post was titled, "My chess club told me it is near impossible to reach 1600 FIDE due to my age." And this is what the original poster wrote. "Do you agree with this statement? I'm 30, rated 1400 on chess.com. Part of the fun for me is improving. I'd be sad if I'm stuck at one point for the rest of my life. I'm playing mostly 15 plus 10 rapid. I analyze almost all of my games, win or lose, to see what is good and what is wrong and take notes. I'm watching Eric Rosen's speedrun on YouTube to see what to improve at certain ELO and take notes on every video. I also read in a chess book that it takes around 7 to 8 years of hard work to master a subject. I'm around 2 to 3 years into my chess career." And then he puts edit. "So far, I'm seeing progress in my play, but really slowly. I am having a hard time climbing to 1500. Will age really hinder my development?" This question, he's basically saying that he went to his chess club. They told him he couldn't reach 1600 because he's 30, which I will say up front, that's utterly ridiculous. Most people who responded agree with me that absolutely he can get to 1600. Let's look at some of the responses and I'll give my own take. So the first response is from someone rated 18 to 2000 on chess.com. See, there we go. Everybody has a 2000 rapid rating on chess.com. I guess on Reddit, you can put a little descriptor about who you are. And he says, "If you are willing to invest some time into studying chess, 1600 FIDE is a very achievable goal for anyone at any age. So don't be discouraged by your chess club." Yes, I agree. That comment, short and to the point, I agree. It's absolutely possible. Again, I think you could probably get higher than 1600. And then another comment, "It's usually just because as you get older, you can't commit as much time to practice and study. It is also easier for younger people to climb faster because of better neuroplasticity, but you can improve at any age." Well, I definitely agree you can improve at any age. I also agree the issue when you get older, I mean, the whole brain and neuroplasticity, I'm not sure about that. I'm not fully convinced. But what he says about the problem with it being difficult as you get older is because you have more responsibility. Absolutely. And then the next person said, "Just haters. If you put in the time and effort, there's no way you wouldn't hit 1600. Yeah, I agree with that." And he continues, "Not saying it'd be easy, but I think anyone could. Most important thing to do is play tournaments though. 15 plus 10 is great, but playing tournaments is the only way to know where you're at. Also think it's tough playing multiple games over multiple days. So the older you get, the more fatigue you might feel." Well, yeah, definitely, which is why I feel you should play at the club level if possible. And I agree with him that playing in tournaments is really how you know where you're at. Absolutely. Next person says, "It's completely possible. I'm rated 1700 plus FIDE myself, and I achieved that when I was above 30. It's been a while since I played FIDE tournaments though. Those are not worth it to me anymore. I have to pay the tournament fee, pay the national federation from my country every year just to have a number next to my name, but I miss going to the chess clubs." Yeah, so another player who prefers club level play over the major events. Next person said, "Becoming a master at that age, very hard. Becoming 1700, very achievable if you put in the time and effort. I started at 37 years old myself and climbed to 1500 online and 1300 US chess in a year." All right, very good. Now, achieving a rating of 1600, that's the number we're using for this episode. That's possible. Now, as far as achieving master, because I hear this a lot too, people are adult beginners or adult developing players and they go, I want to get to master, like 1600's not enough. I want to get to 2200. I will say this. Here's my take on that. I guess it's possible. Anything's possible. But statistically, you will likely not get to 2,200 as an adult beginner. I would love for anyone to do that. I'll be your biggest fan. And I believe it's possible. But what I'm saying is I'm looking at it like from like a mathematician or statistician point of view. Statistically, it's most likely not going to happen that you're going to get to 2,200. All right. So I'm just going by sort of the data and the numbers. Is it possible? I guess anything's possible. But like I said, the odds of that happening are very, very low. Whereas, getting to 1,600 is certainly possible. I mean, could you get to maybe 2,000? Maybe. But 2,200 is definitely tough. But if anyone does that, hey, that's great. I'll be your number one fan. The next comment is the rule of thumb of adults not improving much is more or less true because usually adults can't nor want to really commit to improve in a game. And then someone responded, can't say that's true for everyone. I have a ton of spare time in my 30s due to a low pressure job and my ELO has capped at 1,500. I just can't advance. I do puzzle training, study master games, have similar ELO practice partners, and have a stable opening repertoire. I watch Daniel Naroditsky, Gotham Chess, Remote Chess Academy, and Agadmator. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I watch and use the chess.com lessons too. I prefer the 15 plus 10 time format, but have dabbled with 30 plus 0 too. Occasionally, I can beat 1800s if matched against them, but I stabilize at 1500 due to significant inconsistency. So that's interesting. Everyone's path is different. I'm not sure how to respond to that particular person's journey while they're having trouble, but it's an interesting response about stagnation. And I will say this, we all go through periods where we just stagnate. Everyone's going to go through that. You're going to go through it as you start playing in tournaments. You're going to have periods where you're not going to really increase or decrease, but it's going to kind of flatline. That happens. You just keep working and hopefully you'll hit an upward trajectory. We're now going to take one more short break and we'll be back to continue this discussion in just a moment. So a few more responses about this post where someone said that people at his chess club said he couldn't achieve a rating of 1,600. Next response is, I started playing, knew the rules, played a bit with friends as a kid, but nothing serious in 2020. By mid-2023, I played my first tournament, Classical, got a national rating around 1570. I haven't played tournaments since then, but my online rating is around 150 points higher now than back then. You keep studying and playing, you will keep growing. There will be a limit at some point, but no one can tell what that will be for you beforehand. I think that's very well said. Next comment. The biggest problem you are going to run into trying to improve your rating playing online, like chess.com, are all the people cheating. I read somewhere that about 1/3 of people cheat. I believe it. Of course, they don't cheat the whole game. Most sites would detect that and close the account. They use help just enough to stay in the game or win. There is really no way to stop it. My rating is about 1630 on chess.com, but I don't have much interest in trying to get better when maybe 1/3 of my opponents are using Stockfish. Another major problem I run into is playing someone rated, say, 1650, but their highest rating is 1900. There's always something suspicious about that. So a lot of people agree with those comments about cheating. I've spoken about that myself. I think it's probably a higher number of players who do cheat than what the sites are telling us. A lot of times they downplay it. Grandmaster Jesse Cry, who we all know and love, he believes that at the amateur level, that once players get a 2,000 rating online, that about half of them are cheating. That was his opinion. May be true. We're sort of sidestepping here because he's speaking about the online ecosystem, whereas we're talking about your over-the-board rating. But it's still an interesting point because obviously there are cheaters online. And even if you're an over-the-board person, you want to use online play as kind of a training thing. And when you're not getting a fair game, when people are cheating, it's really hard to know where you're at against another human who's playing without using Stockfish. So even though it's about online chess, that does kind of tie into what we're talking about. And the final comment from this Reddit thread, which again, I will link up in the show notes. This person says, I know at least 5 people who started after their kids did and hit 1600 plus, especially now that they've inflated FIDE ratings, and a 1600 today is basically a 1300 from 2023. I wouldn't be surprised if you showed up at your first tournament and lost every game because you can't handle long time controls, then went back for your second tournament and reached your 1600 goal in it. I also know 2 FMs who started at 18 and 20 and another 2100 guy who started in his mid 20s. Right. But again, those are probably exceptions, those last 2 things about the FMs. Just to be clear about FIDE versus US chess. US chess did not do a major ratings deflation overhaul like FIDE did, where people got a boost. As far as whether an adult beginner can achieve 1600, I believe that's true even for US chess, where there isn't any kind of rating boost from deflation. I believe it can be done. Again, if you put the time in, if you have that foundation that I spoke about and your studying just isn't these sort of loosely interconnected things, but everyone learns at different rates. Again, the stories you hear out there of people who have these major rating gains, it can be inspiring, but it can be frustrating at the same time. But you can't look at it and say, well, how come this guy was able to, gain 400 points in a year and I'm struggling? Again, those are the exceptions that prove the rule. Most people are not going to have like a surge in rating. It's going to be slow and steady. And your rating trajectory, it's going to look like a heart monitor. It's going to go up, down, up, down. There's going to be swings. There's going to be periods where you're plateauing. This is all normal at the amateur level. And the goal is over time is that it will gradually increase. Now, of course, it's important that you enjoy the process, enjoy the game. That's the most important thing. But again, I know I was looking at this strictly from a mathematical and a ratings point of view. I did qualify that up front, so I realized that's the approach I'm taking. But I'll just cap this off with what I said earlier. Your rating, it's not so much about your playing strength. It's really about your tournament performance and your tournament results. That's what it represents. So you might have an over-the-board rating of 1500. And technically, you might be, quote unquote, stronger than that rating. You might have a great opening repertoire. You're great tactically. You have a whole thing, the middle game, end game, everything is solid. But maybe you keep making that one blunder because you get nervous, even though you're playing at a much higher level, because you're making those blunders and you're losing. Well, you're a 1500 player, because again, you are what your rating says you are as far as your tournament performance. So anyhow, an adult beginner can absolutely get to 1600 if they put the time in and if they're focused and organized about their approach, if they're not just mindlessly playing bullet chess online. I think it can absolutely be done. As always, we really appreciate you listening, and I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.